Eastman set off that morning with good intentions, focused on becoming someone he once was. He felt Penny was giving him a chance. Despite what he had said to her over the phone, Eastman still had no intention of going to Vietnam for the Herald. It was a lie. Penny would be relieved to know that Eastman was, in fact, not going to Vietnam, and this is what he wanted to avoid at all costs. A lie, a good one, was duplicitous. Once Penny began negotiations to get him to stay, he could barter for his marriage. It was certainly not the worst lie told over the course of the war. Upon leaving the house, Eastman had placed in his breast pocket the matchbook from the Waverly Inn, the thief's number, so he presumed, written on the inside flap. He patted his breast every few blocks to make sure it was there. He took the subway into Manhattan and got off at Union Square. A protest was in progress at the foot of the park. Young men and women with guitars, beads, bandanas, hippies, dopers, vets, students, and dropouts. They sat around cross-legged. Some of them, it seemed, had been camping out in the park. The nights had been warm enough, but this sudden encounter with youth gave him an intimation of tiredness. He could smell their fatigue through the musk and body odor and marijuana smoke. This generation was tired. They had been spit out, abused, drafted for a decade. Still, they were determined to keep their lives. A sign hung over the Southwest Park entrance. Among the soldiers who died, 12 were 17, 3,092 were 18, 14,057 were 20, 9,662 were 21. He took his notepad out of his hip pocket and wrote the figures down. He would check them later against the records he kept of the war, the news clippings stored in a file in his desk. As he walked deeper into the park, he found men sleeping on benches. They were veterans in their 20s, looking much closer to death than he did. Some homecoming. He had a point of comparison. Back in the winter of 1945, he had returned from war to his wife, Barbara, his college sweetheart. She was devastated to hear that he would only be home for a month's time before he was to return to the Philippines to begin a job with the Associated Press. His first few days back, they stayed with his parents in Brooklyn Heights. The apartment was too loud and too small. His mother, Frances, scolded his father, Bert, until his father became irate, fleeing the apartment for the track. He remembered being home with his wife and feeling like he was 13. Fran would be washing dishes in the kitchen, the clinking sound of the china, the pots against pans. He couldn't think there. He felt he had more room in the belly of an aircraft carrier among a fleet of Marines. He fled with Barbara to the Catskill Mountains, rented a cottage where they caught up on much of the lovemaking he had missed while deployed. It was a celebratory time, post-war. After a few weeks of country living, which relaxed his mood, they returned to Brooklyn. He left her with his parents and flew back to Manila. She was willing to let him go for the purpose of starting a career as a correspondent and to begin the book he spoke about constantly. Half of Eastman's time as a correspondent was spent in Manila, reporting on the rebuilding of a Japanese-occupied city. Because of his service, he gained access the other correspondents didn't have. He frequented the officers' club at the Manila Hotel, had drinks with lieutenants and generals. They trusted him not to write anything too tell-all. Eastman was fine with it. He was not after a story for the AP. He was interested in talking to people for his book, the men who were still stationed in the Philippines and their stories of patrols and ambushes in a jungle thicket of death. He got them talking, under the guise of being a reporter writing about Reconstruction. He had a tremendous memory then and would retain whole conversations until he returned to his hotel room to expel them onto paper. He wrote Barbara 5 times a week, and after 13 months with the AP, he quit and returned home. Eastman had made enough cash, including his military severance, to support his wife. They lived cheaply in Brooklyn in a small one-room apartment, spent summers on the Cape, and after 2 years of writing and living off his savings and Barbara's salary, he had completed the manuscript that would become The American War. His generation had their share of shell shock and misspent youth, but Vietnam had changed the dialogue. Eastman left the park and the singing and chanting behind him. He walked south along 4th Avenue, where the booksellers were just opening their doors. So many of them were gone now. Gilman's, Loon Kramer's, Schulte's. Weiser's was still standing on the corner. Eastman stopped in front of the window to gaze at their selection. He saw a Norman Hamish title, his nemesis for the Pulitzer in 1953. He recognized most of the authors, none of note. Then a young woman, not old Sam Weiser, wheeled out a cart of discounted titles to be placed on the 20-cent rack. She smiled at Eastman, then unloaded the books hurriedly and without care. She went back inside and turned over the sign on the glass door to "Open." Eastman flipped through the fresh stack of used dreck. He had an appointment with his manager in an hour. Maybe he'd find something to read at a cafe to kill the time. Shuffling through the used paperbacks, he desperately searched for a copy of a Norman Hamish title in order to gloat. He could send it over to Hamish with a note. Sticking out of the 20-cent bin, plain as day, good old Weiser's, your pal Eastman. Instead, he pulled a copy that was familiar. It was the movie edition of his American War, generically retitled The Pacific. The producers of the film had demanded a title change, and his publisher released this horrific edition with the movie's poster on the cover. Palm trees, biplanes, tanks, and illustrations of the actors on a poster-white backdrop. For less than a subway token, a masterpiece. Worse still, he was responsible for penning the screenplay in 6 months' time in a Hollywood Hills bungalow back in 1958. That damn movie reversed his credibility.